Hi, and welcome to Random Walks in HR with me, Tim Peffers. And today we're talking about well-being, which is kind of weird because for those of you who follow or subscribe or generally stalk me, we've probably talked about well-being before. In fact, you may be getting some weird deja vu because you've probably seen this slide deck before as well. Well, yes, we did. Last time I did a video about well-being. However, that video was 40 minutes long, and judging from the stats, that was probably roughly 40 minutes longer than most people wanted to watch. So, what I thought I was do a quick 5-6 minute video around one of the themes and one of the topics. If you find this interesting, what I'll do is I'll post a link to the full-blown mega video in the chat, and feel free to follow up and watch that, or just rewatch with this one like 8 times. So, what we're talking about? We're talking about agile and project-based working. So, how does this boost well-being? Well, we knew from all our pulse surveys that actually we see a very strong relationship between how much time you spend working on projects and your well-being score and your employee net promoter score, which is essentially the way that we measure engagement. What we don't know is why. So when we went into the study, we had all these big hypotheses around why potentially people who work on projects have better well-being than people who don't. And what we found out was we were idiots. All our hypotheses were just completely wrong. We thought maybe, working on projects, you have bigger networks, more connectivity, more collaboration. No, the bigger your network, the worse your well-being is. We thought maybe, the manager influence is less when you're working on a project, right? We see in the lockdown, people kind of, the connections kind of grew more intense within teams. We lost that cross collaboration. Maybe the manager was being a bigger influence, but yes, managers do influence things, but actually it's not the driving factor behind essentially employees' well-being. We also thought maybe, people work on projects, maybe they're more strategic projects, we could find something within our objectives data that relates to employees' well-being, and essentially absolutely not. No, your objectives have absolutely no relationship with what your well-being is going to be. So we kind of gave up. We forgot about it. We just did our analysis. And then, as we started to understand what really drives well-being, it all started to make sense. So, first thing we looked at is what drives positive well-being. And essentially, and this will be no surprise to any psychologists out there, it is what we call control over work. So we looked at, how many emails you're sending, how many emails you're getting, how many meetings you're attending, your demographics, are you going to the office, you're not going to the office, and there's some relationships there, but really the biggest driving factor is, do you have control over your work? Do you manage your responsibilities? Are you able to manage your workload? Do you have that decision making? Are you empowered to work the way that you want to work? Now, when we try and explain control over work to senior leaders and stakeholders, everyone gets a little bit worried because we can't just let everyone do what they want at work, right? We have things we need to do, we have things to deliver. So the best way we found to explain control over work is within this project-based working, this agile methodology, right? You have your product manager who has the vision and oversees everything. Then you have the product owner who makes decisions around what needs to be prioritized, what needs to go into the next sprint. And then once that happens, and ideally, if you're doing it right, the team is then self-organizing. Self-organizing is essentially giving people control over their work. You give them a load of tasks, and within the team, they figure out who's best to do what happens when, and you give them a nice big deadline, a sort of nice long sprint to empower them to make those decisions and do what they see fit. It's also giving them the control to choose what tools and techniques they use to deliver that work. So if you're working in an agile way and you're allowing teams to self-organize, that's going to help drive much better well-being. Now, what drives poor well-being? I don't have time to explain all of this. Watch the longer video if you'd really love to learn about the vicious cycle of well-being. But essentially, one of the biggest drivers of poor well-being, people who are really struggling, is unreasonable deadlines. And again, we think about those sprints. We think about giving people 2 weeks to deliver something rather than saying, I need something now, 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 this kind of tyranny of now. What allows people to do is have more time to organize their work. It gives them more control, but it also brings in things such as, if you're sick, you can take a day off because you have lots of time to then deliver what you need to deliver. Those people who are having to do something every day, they don't feel they can take time off. They're always busy, they're working whilst they're ill, they're not taking annual leave, and so that's helping drive this vicious cycle of negative well-being. So 2 week sprints, for example, help give reasonable deadlines, help drive or help avoid negative and poor well-being. Now, not a driver, but certainly a very good coping mechanism and flexibility, right? When we looked at the data, especially in people's work behavior habits, the number of meetings, number of colleagues, number of networks, number of emails sent and received, there were relationships there, but a much stronger one was around how much do you vary your hours, right? From day to day, but also week to week. And again, I think if we think about that 2 week sprint, what was really interesting, we looked at flexibility in two ways. This way, how much you vary per day, but the 2 week thing, essentially what we found was that those people who had the highest amount of flexibility over a 2 week period actually had terrible well-being. They were doing 70 hours a week, and then next week they were doing 30 hours, they were doing 55 hours, and then they were doing 20 hours, and people had this kind of boom bust relationship of huge workload, then trying to rest and recover and constantly varying it. They had pretty negative well-being. The people who then had the least amount of variation, right, the lower quartile, the people who are either always working a lot or people who are always trying to work a very set work pattern every single week, they were also having not great well-being, because when the workload goes up and down, which, let's be honest, always happens, essentially they were struggling to cope. The people who had the strongest well-being were in that second and third quartile, had a nice bit of variation, around 10 hours variation per week. So, they might do a 45-hour week, a 35-hour week, a 50-hour week, a 40-hour week, but having a little bit of variation to vary with the workload, but also spread that workload out over a 2 week period, they were having much stronger well-being. So again, related to those deadlines, if you can bring it out and do those 2 week sprints, A, you allow flexibility, and B, you also allow people to maybe work on a weekend or work a longer day here and then take time back there. So really think about stretching out those deadlines, allowing people to work the way they want, really helps drive positive well-being. Now, we have a few other insights. I don't have time to go now, but if you found this useful, if you found this interesting, please do check out the full-length video where we go into things more in depth, especially around that psychological model and how we designed the study. And there's a few more interesting factoids around, does actually taking annual leave help, and other things. So hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it wasn't a complete waste of your time, and thank you for watching.